Please.
All members are here. Councilor Duncan and Manager Luther are via phone.
Thank you. Next item is Pledge of Allegiance. May we all stand at this time.
Allegiance
To the flag
to the flag
of the
of
United
the
States
United States of America
and to the
and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Item 3 is special orders of the day and announcements. 3A is proclamation recognizing the 17th season of the Beloit International Film Festival. Vice President Keys presenting.
I believe we have Greg Gerard here to accept the proclamation tonight.
Yes, and Lindsay Mitchell, board member extraordinaire.
Excellent.
Stand next to me.
The City of Beloit, Wisconsin official proclamation. Whereas the Beloit International Film Festival will celebrate its 17th season from February 25th to March 6th, 2022. And whereas BIF 2022 will bring more than 125 independent films from over 24 countries, along with their creators and performers, to our community. And whereas BIF has expanded over the years to provide artistic entertainment and information to the greater Beloit community year-round. And whereas BIF has enhanced the reputation and attractiveness of Beloit regionally and nationally, and brought international attention to our city and our creativity. And whereas BIF is truly a creation of this community, built on the support of local individuals, businesses, and institutions, members of the Beloit Film Society and the BIF founders, local and state foundations, and the Wisconsin Arts Board, the State of Wisconsin, and the National Endowment for the Arts. And whereas BIF is a walkable film festival, drawing audiences to 10 screening venues and event spaces in the downtown area, and whereas BIF annually draws hundreds of volunteers to serve as BIF ambassadors. Now, therefore, the Beloit City Council thanks those whose support has allowed BIF to grow and persevere through these challenging years, urges the community to support and celebrate BIF 2022, and welcome the artists and guests to our community. Presented this 21st day of February 2022, Clinton Anderson, Council President.
Thank you so much. As usual, gosh, we're so excited to be back on the ground again, in-person festival. We will have a virtual component, but we're looking forward to having people sitting down in our beautiful venues in downtown Beloit. And I just want to also say thank you to all of our sponsors, all the people that support us. It's been a crazy couple of years here, and people have really stuck with us. And that doesn't happen to all arts organizations, and we are really thankful for all the support you all give us. I will say this, you can help out just a little bit more. We need a few more volunteers. And we've also got a great event happening on Thursday night. It's called Fest Eve. It's at Iron Tech, and we still have some tickets available. So those of you who are interested in a very good time and seeing all the local luminaries gathered in one place, please join us for Fest Eve. BeloitFilmFest.org is the place to go for all the news, all the information that you need. And this is one of my board members, Lindsay Mitchell. Would you like to just say something to the group?
Sure. Yeah, at a time when it's really hard to connect with your community, this is a great way to do it. So come on out and watch a movie with me.
Thank you.
All right.
Good.
Thank you all.
May I ask a question
Yes, you
of the
may.
presenters? Thank you. Just in case people would rather have a paper copy of the schedule of movies and events, where can they get one?
We've distributed all the program books around the state line area. I know they've got them at DBA, they've got them at Bushel and Peck's, Bagels and More. I mean, the usual places.
Great.
So you just kind of have to hunt around for them right now. But we are going to be publishing a list. In fact, it probably might be up already, identifying all the places that program books were distributed.
Oh,
to.
terrific, good.
There are 6,000 of them out there,
Woo!
besides the 15 or so thousand that the BDN sent out with their regular deliveries. So
Terrific.
there are a lot of program books out there, and yeah, that's the best that I can tell you right now.
That's great, thank
I
you
have
so
some in
much.
my office, but I'm hanging on to them because, you know,
You might need to know what's going on.
yeah, so come talk to me. Bring a Bud Light with you. I'll give you a program. All right, thank you so much.
Item 3B is recognition of the late Richard Dick Holm for his decades of public service as a city attorney.
Recently, one of our former city attorneys, Dick Holm, passed away. So we'd like to honor his decades of service by a moment of silence. So if you're able to, please stand at this time to honor Dick Holm. Thank you.
Item 4A is a public hearing for ordinance number 3741, amending the zoning district map of the city of Beloit from C3 Community Commercial District to M1 Limited Manufacturing District for the properties at 10 and 30 Park Avenue, and from PLI Public Lands and Institutes District to M1 District for the proposed to be vacated western half of Prospect Street.
We have Community Development Director Julie Christensen here to present tonight.
The former Cub Foods property at 20 Park Avenue has been purchased by P&E Enterprises, doing business as Welders Supply Company, who intends to improve and expand the building. And they also purchased the properties that are subject to this request, which is 10 and 30 Park Avenue, which are the lots that are on Park Avenue, the smaller lots. And then the western half of the proposed to be vacated Prospect Street. The application has submitted a petition to vacate Prospect Street between Colby Street and the Wisconsin-Illinois border, which is a separate action item for council review at your next meeting. If it's approved, what happens is that they want it, the property is divided in half, so half would come to the city, half would go to them. They are trying to consolidate their parcels into one. So this request is the zoning piece, which is on your agenda for first reading tonight, so you wouldn't take action till the next meeting. And their request is to rezone this property from C3 to M1 for the 10 and 30 Park Avenue. And then for the western half of the Prospect right-of-way, that would be rezoned from PLI to M1 to make it consistent with the 20 Park Avenue property. Plan Commission did review this application on January 19, 2022, and voted 4-1 to recommend approval of this zoning map amendment. Commissioner Ramsden, there was actually quite a bit of discussion about the street vacation at Plan Commission, and Commissioner Ramsden voted against this proposal after expressing a preference for keeping the Prospect Street right-of-way under city ownership and control. The discussion at Plan Commission really revolved around the fact that if a pedestrian pathway went through there where the bridge is, that there's the ability to do that further to the west, that it is likely that that bridge, if it was built, would not be at that current location, and then it would connect over to our property, and that where the bridge comes across is actually in Illinois already. So both sides of the bridge are in Illinois. So there is the ability to provide that pedestrian connection without stopping this project. So Plan Commission recommended approval 4-1. Mark is nodding his head, so apparently I got it right. What happened at Plan Commission?
I was going to clarify about the access on the west bank there, so.
But this is on your agenda for first public hearing and first reading tonight.
Thank you. This time, the public hearing is now open. Would anyone wishing to speak in favor or opposed to this item, please come forward at this time. Second call. Third call. Public hearing is now closed. Do I have a motion to lay this item over?
So moved.
Motion by Preschel, second by Levy. Any discussion? Okay, Councilor Preschel.
I just wanted to clarify what Julie said. There was plenty of space on the Wisconsin side of the bridge to allow for connections to existing bike paths in that park area without having to worry about using any of the abandoned roadway. The space was adequate. So that's what became clear in our discussions at the Plan Commission.
Thank you.
Oh, and as long as I got the mic, I will say I'm really thrilled to see Welders Supply, going in there and expanding and expanding. It's a great hometown business. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item 5 is public comments.
We've reached the point of the agenda where members of the public may speak to the council about items that may come before us in the future. Council may not act on any requests, but may refer you to a staff member if needed. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less and refrain from any personal attacks on council or staff. You do not have to fill out a speaker form, but we ask that you do that before a meeting. And Madam Clerk, did we receive any written comment?
Did. This is from Steve Howland at 1617 Emerson Street, Beloit. I write to the City Council concerning addressing the homelessness crisis with ARPA funds. The City of La Crosse used ARPA funding to rent the Econo Lodge as a winter shelter for those without housing and plans to allocate $2.5 million towards childhood investments and $4 million for housing in neighborhoods. What other cities in Wisconsin do may not be applicable to Beloit, but they may serve as creative guidelines for what may be appropriate. I encourage the council to seek to address the disparities that exist in Beloit and not just settle for standard response of, this benefits the entire community. ARPA funds are appropriately used to support those most impacted by the pandemic with the greatest amounts going to those most impacted. Many studies over the last 30 years have highlighted the disparities racial minorities in Beloit experience, from infant mortality, education, health care, incarceration, income, and wealth to life expectancy. In Beloit, the pandemic not only highlighted, but exacerbated those disparities. Let's try to close some of the gaps. I applaud the recent and current efforts of the city in working with the BATFO to address the homelessness in Beloit, and I know there is communication with those involved with efforts to pass resolutions at the county level. To help address this, I would encourage city councilors to contact members of the County Human Services Board to support resolutions, creating a housing coordinator and allocating funding for housing consultant services using American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA funds, reserving American Rescue Plan Act funds for initiated to develop a family-centered transitional housing resource in Rock County, coming before the Human Services Board on Wednesday, February 23rd, and if passed, before the County Board on February 24th. Although the GOFA states adequate time should be taken to carefully consider all alternatives for the prudent use of ARPA funding prior to committing the resources to ensure the best use of the temporary funding, this should not negate the urgency which is paramount with issues such as homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we receive any speaker forms tonight too?
I did not.
Thank you. Would anyone else wish to speak tonight? Second call? Third call? Public comments now closed.
Item 6 is the consent agenda. All items listed under the consent agenda are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered at this point on the agenda.
Any council member like anything removed from the consent agenda?
Item 6D, please.
Item 6D has been removed from the consent agenda. Would any council member like anything else removed from the consent agenda? If not, the consent agenda consists of items 6A through 6C, and then 6E and 6F. Can I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
So moved.
Motion by Forbeck, second by Preschel. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item 6D is consideration of Resolution 2022-035, approving a Telfair Park facility use agreement between the City of Beloit and the School District of Beloit.
And our Public Works Director, Laura Williamson, will present.
Good evening. You have before you a resolution that would approve the use of Telfer Parks Facility Use Agreement between the School District of Beloit and the City of Beloit. This would allow them to utilize Pullman Field and Telfer Field for both the baseball and softball program from the school district. They are looking to use the facility from the beginning of March through the beginning of June. We're very excited about this collaborative effort to be able to utilize this great facility. They will be doing all the maintenance of the mowing in exchange for use of the fields, and you'll have before you a little bit here also, they want to bring a food truck in. So very excited that we could offer this and have this great partnership with the school district for this facility. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Preschel, second by Levy. Any discussion? Vice President Keys?
Thank you. As a counselor, one of the most common questions I get is about Telfer Park, and so I wanted to bring this item off to highlight this collaboration, that I'm very pleased that we're partnering with the district for our Purple Knights to have that home field for this season. And then I was also wondering if there was any update on process, just as far as with Telfer moving forward. That'd be like the second other most common question that I get. So I don't know if there can be just a comment on the process of like what to expect next for the public.
Yes.
Okay, you're in front of them. Go ahead.
Hello, City Council. In response to that question, as I had previously sent an email to the full council, the RFP for Pullman has been, or for Telfer Park as a whole, has been delayed. And we are continuing to work with, obviously, the School District of Beloit, as indicated this evening. But we will have to evaluate the status as we move forward. The RFP still needs to be completed, placed on the street, public input solicited, and options presented to the council. So those will be our next steps, but I do not have a confirmed timeline on those items.
Thank you. And I know that there's a lot of public very passionate about our wonderful parks and park space. So looking forward to that process when it happens.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item 7 is licenses. There are none. Item 8 is ordinances. Consideration of ordinance number 3743, amending 14.22 sub 12 sub A of the Code of the General Ordinance of the City of Beloit related to hours of services for alcohol on Saturdays for sidewalk cafe permits. This is the first reading.
Shauna Alameen from Downtown Beloit Association will be here to present.
Hi, thank you. We were contacted by one of the owners downtown that they would like to have their cafe open at 8 a.m. starting on Saturdays, especially for the farmers market, but year round. And so we are bringing this before you. We did make the amendments appropriate in the ordinance, as you'll see. We are very supportive of this, as it would help not only this asking business, but everybody downtown. I've spoken to a few of the other businesses, and they are wanting to amend their license as well if this is passed with you. This would, like I said, be year-round. We do have the market year-round, so in case you guys don't know that, we are a year-round market, but also business happens year-round, and so we want to, on nice weather days, obviously have this opportunity that if it's nice enough to sit outside, we would like you to sit outside downtown and maybe enjoy a mimosa or a Bloody Mary while you're at it. Any questions?
Before we get to the questions, can I have a motion to lay this item over? Motion by Preschel, second by Levy. Any discussion? Councilor Preschel, then we'll go to Levy.
Is there any pressing need for us to suspend the rules and move this ahead quickly? Or can we go through the normal process?
This is the time that we would be reviewing the licensees with the planning commission, with the planning department. So if it were possible, that would be great, just so that way they can do it one time instead of making them wait to apply for their
Oh,
license.
it'd be a 2-week delay, between, basically, it'd build in a 2-week delay from where you're at, where we're sitting right now. And the reason I ask that is because that's usually the reason we have for suspending the rules. We have to have a time need, a pressing time need, so.
It would help them get their alcohol amendment stuff that they have to get done. I'm not
Which
sure the exact
itself
wording.
will take
but-
a month or so. Mhm.
And then they would be ready to go by farmer's market when they're really all ready to go for sidewalks.
Okay. That's why I asked. We have a motion pending, so I can't make one, so.
Well, along that lines, Council Pressure, I was already leaning towards that way, that I think even though we look for time reasonings, I think the quicker we can get things moving, the better. So I would not have a problem with amending this and move it to the second and final reading for final approval this evening, so.
So I believe we have to have Levy withdraw, and then Prussia would have to withdraw, so.
Right.
Both withdraw, okay.
Now we'll make the motion to suspend the rules.
And I'd second.
Okay, so now we have the motion withdrawn, we have Prussia and Levy making a motion to suspend the rules. Any discussion on suspension of the rules?
Yes.
Yes, Counselor Blakely.
I would prefer that we stick with the regular timeline on this so that I myself and perhaps some other counselors could give more consideration to the idea of serving alcohol downtown, starting in the mornings. And I think perhaps the community too would like a little more time to think about it.
Thank you. Any further discussion or comments? Counselor Rogers.
Are we already serving alcohol downtown?
Yes.
This
it
is only adding the hours of Saturday mornings?
This is only adding the sidewalk cafe part of it.
Okay, that's all. So there's no alcohol sold on the sidewalk cafes?
Correct, until 11 a.m. currently.
Right. That's what they're already serving alcohol at the sidewalk cafes.
No, they're already serving alcohol inside their premise before 8 a.m. and 8 a.m.
And after 11 a.m.
Right.
So they are serving alcohol at a different time. So my point is, this isn't new.
Correct.
That's my point. Thank you.
City Attorney.
I think just for a point of clarification, Councilor Preschel, they have the ability to sell alcohol at their sidewalk cafe currently. Those hours are restricted from 11 a.m. though. So this is adding 3 hours from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Saturdays only for those sidewalk cafes that already have a license to sell alcohol.
Thank you, Beth. That's the point I was trying to make.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Not. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
Motion passes 6-1. Now on to the merits. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Levy,
Second.
second by Preschel. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
That motion passes 6-1.
Thank you.
Eight B is consideration of ordinance number 3745 to create 18.02 sub 15 sub S of the Code of General Ordinances for the City of Beloit, authorizing outdoor vending by the school district in connection with the facility use agreement for Telfair Park. This is the first reading.
We have Public Works Director Laura Williamson again.
Good evening. You have before you an ordinance that would allow the school district of Beloit to utilize their food truck at Telfair Park during the time that they're having the use agreement for the baseball and the softball games and practices, which is approximately March 7th through June 11th, I believe it is.
Question.
Can I get a motion first?
Well, before we
Yes.
move to the motion, I do have a question because I also want to move this to the second and final reading this evening. So I don't know if you want me to pose my question first and then make that motion for the amendment.
Can we get a motion on the table first? On the floor first.
I would so move.
Motion by Levy, second by Keys. Counselor Levy.
So my question is there a time limit that they would have where they could vend out of the food truck? Is it all day? I just want to make sure that moving forward, there's no restrictions on what time they could start and what time they could end. Correct.
This would allow them through the time that they are utilizing the use agreement, which is
Okay.
from March
Well,
7th.
I'm talking about the time of day. the time of day?
There is no
There's
restriction for
no
time of day.
restrictions. Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that, make sure.
Just as a technicality, the parks are only open for a certain period of time, so they would have to comply with the park hours.
So within those park hours, that's why I wanted to just make sure, so, okay. And there's no other questions, Mr. Chair, I would like to move this from the first reading to the second and final reading tonight. And my purpose behind that is simply, because if we're talking about baseball season, which is right around the corner, I think this allows the vendor or the school district to get adequate staffing in there to be able to man the food truck when the program starts or when the season starts. They're not scrambling to try to find people.
Okay, so Counselor Levy and Vice President Keys, are you both willing to withdraw your motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And that motion's been withdrawn, so do we have a new motion?
I would move to suspend the rules and move this from a first reading to a second and final reading this evening.
Motion by Levy, is there a second?
I'll second that. This is Duncan.
We'll give it to Duncan this time. Any comments?
I
Counselor
don't
Blakely?
think that was fair giving it to Duncan, but other than that, I'm for the motion.
Counselor Blakely, I did see your hand up. Did you have a question earlier?
Did I?
Yeah.
No, I was just getting ready to second.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any discussion?
No, I'm
Counselor
just
Cro-
gonna point out that March is literally around the corner. It's literally weeks away, so doing this is a good idea.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Now onto the merits.
So moved.
Motion by Levy. Is there a
Second.
Second by Forbeck. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item 9 is appointments. There are none. And item 10 is councilor activities and upcoming events.
Start with Vice President Keys.
Thank you, Counselor Anderson. As far as commission reports, don't have too much to update from the Parks and Recs Conservation Advisory Commission. Somewhat relevant to all commissions, actually, is that the city's going to have a sustainability forum coming up on February 28th, 2022. And that's going to be from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. and just discussing about what sustainability means to the city, city business, and with the community, looking at the three-pronged approach of people, profit, and planet. So I really encourage everyone to register and contribute to the conversation. You can go to the city website, and you do have to register online. Another exciting thing I want to highlight is that the city of Beloit had a report come out from our PFAS testing. So the forever chemicals that have been a big question mark to communities around the state of Wisconsin. The city of Beloit was really a pioneer as far as went ahead and tested before the state mandated testing dates and requirements. And so in 2021, we tested our wells looking for 33 different PFAS, and the results were really good. 3 wells did not have any detectable levels, and all the rest were well below the recommended standard. So that is also, details can also be found on the city website, and different reports, news reports highlighted that as well. And then I do want to say I'm looking forward to the presentation coming up later today, this evening. Since November, I have been providing an update on the number of youth identified as homeless within our school district. And at present, the number from the district liaison was 440 today. So especially looking at sustainability and getting balance with people, I'm really looking forward to this evening's discussion and problem solving together. And that ends my report.
Thank you. Counselor Levy?
I would just like to, once again, give congratulations or support to Chief Sales in the police department. As you see there, a lot of the activity that was going on in the city, we're getting closure to that, and I truly believe it's because of what we've been asking all along that if people see something, say something, because it's easy to sit back at home and say the police aren't doing this and the police aren't doing that. Council needs to do something better, but as I keep stating over and over, Beloit is all of our city. We are all in this together. The only way we can get things under control is make sure that if we see something happening, just let people know. As an advocate of Beloit, I am a stern believer that if I'm around people and they're talking negative about the city, I kind of walk away because I don't want to hear it. Because Beloit, in my opinion, is not going to be judged by just a few incidents that happen, because it happens all over. But I think as a city and residents, we need to continue to promote the positive things that's going on in the city, even when we have a blip in what goes on. But I think I will encourage people to continue that if you see something, help the police out, and you must say something in order to get things done. But I just wanted to thank the chief and his staff for all that they have been doing and working and getting things solved. They're working tirelessly, and oftentimes we hear when nothing is getting done, but very seldom do they hear any congratulations or thank you when they are solving stuff. So I just wanted to say that to them publicly. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Blakely?
In addition to whatever else other members of council might be saying in a moment, I do want to offer my condolences to the 19-year-old young man who was fatally shot on January 29th. As Councilor Levy said, the police have already issued an arrest warrant for a man from Madison who is the alleged shooter. And also I wanted to say that the young Beloit man's mother, thanked the people who came forth and spoke to the police. She's very grateful for that, and she wants to commend those people for doing so. And his father said that he hoped that his son's death would be the spark for some other people, for other people in the community, to come forward when they see something or they witness something violent, to help the police in their jobs. On a much different note, I wanted to let you know, as a member of the library board, that Beloit Public Library actually rents snowshoes. They do. The others are nodding their head. I had thought of taking up snowshoeing this winter. I didn't get around to it, so I didn't realize this till the library board meeting the other night. They come in a bag, complete with poles. All you have to do is check them out using your library card and signing a waiver. The snowshoes go by the weight of the user rather than the shoe size. So anyone from 25 pounds to 300 pounds can rent snowshoes and use some of this upcoming storm to advantage. The police had a very happy ending. There's a small story, a lost dog on the east side of Beloit. He was found Saturday. They found that he was microchipped, and so the police were able to bring him home for a happy reunion the following day. So hooray. Yeah, good work again. About the International Film Festival that we heard quite a bit about from Greg and Lindsay, I wanted to mention that the honorary chairperson this year is Beloit attorney Jeff Livingston, which is quite wonderful, I think. Jeff has done so much for the film festival and the city of Beloit over the last years. Some of the week's highlights include the showing of the movie Daydream Believers, the Monkey's Story, on Saturday night at 7:30 at the Castle. I will be helping to lead the singing, so I'd like you all to come see this happy fool at work. And let me work out my longtime crush on Mickey Dolenz, I admit it. The following day, there's a free event also at the Castle for the whole family. It's a puppet show with live music that starts at 3 o'clock Sunday. And I hear a rumor that there will be a dinosaur grand finale. So the kids may want to be there for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Preschel?
I just want to say I knew Dick Holm pretty well, and he was a really funny guy. And I didn't see much of him in the recent years, but I spoke to him often, and he was a wealth of background and history, and and a really funny guy, and my condolences to his family. I'd like to mention that the Beloit Arts Center will have its annual juried art show, photo show, photography show, next Friday, March 4th, from 5 to 8. The reception is 5 to 8. I'll have a couple pictures in it, and there will be quite a variety, and they've opened it up a lot to some of the more creative talents of Photoshop users. It used to be a straight photo. You had to just do a straight photo. You couldn't manipulate. And now you are allowed to do so. So you get some really creative stuff in there now. So we'll have some stuff in there. And the reception will be, it's a really nice event. Go down and check it out. The show will be all throughout the month of March. And get down there next week before they pull down all of this month's shows.
Thank you. Councilor Forbeck?
Yes, I'd just like to take a little time, first of all, to thank our police and our officers. Maybe you know that 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that my granddaughter was at the basketball game where the shooting happened, and it has been really tough for the students. So this is extremely helpful. I mean, helpful to have this done, but also helpful for the kids who were there and were really traumatized by this. Also, I'd like to thank the city staff who staff so well the 3 commissions that I serve on. The CDA is Julie Christensen, as though she doesn't have anything else to do with her life. She's fabulous at that, always. Then I just participated in an excellent SLATS meeting, which is our state line transportation planning committee, that people should realize that we're talking right now about the city and the school district partnering together. When people complain about bureaucracies, they'd be very proud of SLATS, because it's all of our area entities working together to help with our transportation, both for roads and bikeways and walkways and bus and et cetera. So anyway, a shout out to whoever did that, and TJ Nee for keeping up so well with what's going on. And last but not least, it's the EOC. We have 3 wonderful young new commissioners on the Equal Opportunities Commission, and Terry Downing does an excellent job. So, and right now, she had some help, but that person left actually to become a police officer. So anyway, just thanks for all the work, the extra work that our city staff does. That's all.
Thank you. Councilor Duncan?
Thank you, City Council President Anderson. And I also want to thank our staff for helping me to be present virtually. So I just want to let you know that I really appreciate it. That said, now for my activities. I attended the Greater Beloit Economic Development Corporation Executive Committee meeting and the Wisconsin Housing Preservation Corporation Board of Directors meeting. And I also met with Emily Pels, who's the principal of Beloit Memorial High School, to discuss the master planning process for our academies. That said, I also want to thank Emily, Dan Kieser, our superintendent, and our school district staff for their continued efforts in working with our wonderful students. I also want to echo my colleagues in thanking Chief Sales and our city staff for organizing an upcoming community meeting to address violent crime and our response and use of force and mental health. Together, we'll make our city safer. So if you see something, please say something. I also want to encourage residents to attend our virtual forum on sustainability. There's information on our Facebook page. And so I just encourage everyone to please join us in discussing our City of Beloit's sustainability initiatives. This ends my councilor report for this evening.
Thank you, Councilor Duncan. And now to my report. I just want to echo everything that everybody said about the the shooting a couple weeks ago and the efforts from law enforcement. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the residents for finally speaking up. I know that there's been a long tradition of just not saying anything to the police, but without our residents, who knows where that case would have been. So thank you for that. I also want to share my appreciation to the staff from the clerk's office for running an election. You got 3 more of those this year, so I'm sure you're very excited for all 3 of those. Yeah, we got one coming up in April, so it's coming quick. So make sure if you're not registered to vote, go do that. I'm sure everybody in this room is registered to vote. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here. But if not, you can go to myvote.wi.gov to check your registration, see where you vote, and you should be able to get any other information about the election and the upcoming elections in 2022. Lastly, I just want to, I know Councilor Levy used to do this when he was president. He would kind of embarrass everybody else publicly. So I just wanted to congratulate Councilor Levy, or should I say Second Vice Chair Levy, on his appointment as Second Vice Chair to the Rock County Board of Supervisors. He's made history as the first Second Vice Chair, so he is the George Washington of Second Vice Chairs in Rock County. So congratulations to you.
Oh, that was good.
And with that, that ends my report.
Oh, that was good.
It took me a while.
Item 11 is City Manager presentation. We have 11A, a presentation of the Landmarks Commission Annual Report of 2021 Historic Preservation Activities.
And Celestino Ruffini is here to present from the Landmarks Commission.
All right, I think we're up and running. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Council, for having me tonight. I'm Celestino Ruffini, resident 2366 Hyacinth Court here in Beloit, and proud to provide this recap, this annual report on your Beloit Landmarks Commission. So thank you for taking the time to review the report in advance of tonight's meeting. I will briefly click through the slides potentially. Well, there we go. So tonight's annual report is provided to you based on the ordinance adopted by City Council in Section 32.0510, which is your historic preservation ordinance. That ordinance states that the commission will provide a report of our activities to you, the council, each and every year. In 2021, the commission met a total of 9 times. I'll just have you forward the slides. Thank you. I'll just point that way. How about that? And sit that there. So on the screen is the current commission as it stands. As of our last meeting, we met just last week, Tuesday, and want to thank not only the commissioners that you see on the screen, but obviously our council representative, Sherry Blakely, but most importantly, just to echo what the commission would say if they were here tonight, a lot of thanks goes to Hillary Rotman and her work in leading all of us in the work that we do through our meetings. She is a great resource, not only to us as commissioners, but to the property owners of the, not only within our historic districts, but with individually designated properties here in the city. But big shout out to Hillary for her work. As always, and with any commission, there's always vacancies, and every now and then we do have vacancies. So, just a reminder to echo what you say at these meetings. I'll say this on behalf of the commission, that those that are interested or willing to serve on the commission, we always invite them to apply to serve. In particular, we look for those that own historic properties. It's not necessarily a requirement, but for some of the seats it is. We love to have representatives from our historic districts, and we do meet monthly on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Next slide, please. So the predominant source of our work comes from what we call COAs, Certificates of Appropriateness. So these are, this is an application that is submitted by property owners of these properties in the city based on Section 32.06 within that ordinance. And it simply states, Any alteration of designated landmarks, landmark sites, or structures within any of Beloit's historic districts shall first receive and require the COA to make work happen. It's a fairly straightforward form that we've utilized for a number of years. We are always looking at making improvements on the form based on feedback we receive from applicants within the process. It's a form that, obviously, as chairman of the commission, I've had to become very familiar with, but I also gained experience in going through this process ourselves as a property owner for our business here in Beloit. So I'm on both sides of the fence now with this. Next slide, please. So the state of preservation in Beloit, and this slide here really is a great synopsis for the community to realize that historic preservation does occur here in the city. A lot of people are unaware that there are efforts in this community to preserve some of our neighborhoods that have very distinct architectural styles, and not only within particular neighborhoods within the community, but we have a number of individually designated properties. For example, just this past week, we addressed and dealt with a COA application for a property on Afton Road that's in the city, but it's one individual residence, and it's just great to deal not only with our districts, but properties all throughout the entire city. So the three we have three locally designated districts. You see those on the screen. The Bluff Street District, which is on the west side. The College Park District, our largest district, that's on the east side. Merrill Street, small and mighty at 4 properties, and right at the sort of east end of Merrill Street. And then the Milwaukee Road and Emerson Street District, which is locally not it's not designated locally as a historic district, but it is at the state level. And that property is eligible for the same tax credits and benefits of other district properties. In addition to those 4 districts, we have 46 other landmarks, other buildings and properties that would go through the process. So as of today, we're at 471 total buildings that are applicable to the process of what we do at Landmarks Commission. Next slide, please. So this slide here is a recap of the projects that were dealt with in the last calendar year. So 47% of the projects were dealt by staff on their own. We have a process for which staff can do internal review, and as well for a number of the projects that need to come to us at the commission. So as you see on the screen, 18 of the 38 projects were approved by staff. Many applications include multiple projects, so that's why the numbers don't all add up to 38. So this is what you see here is the total number of requests by project type, but there were a total of 38 requests made, or 38 requests were made and approved within the calendar year. A wide variety of projects. We'll mention a few here on the next couple slides. Last week we dealt with window replacements, to silo foundation removals, to retaining walls, to paint colors and roofing, and it's a great commission for those who enjoy upkeep of property. So it's a lot of fun. I don't know how many commission chairs can say their work is a lot of fun. So it is. We have a good time. Okay, next slide. All right, so 2 projects we'll recap for you. Last year, the former Hilton Hotel, which is now, which was home to the bookstore, which is now home to Beloit Daily News, and a bridal store and a barber shop. So we approved a COA on this particular property to provide more egress into the property to allow additional tenants within the space. So we made some approvals here, as you see the pictures point out, for a new door on the front side as well on the rear of the building. So this was one interesting project that we took care of last year. And the next slide will show another one. So on the back of the building where Ryan Flush Flower is, this staircase is actually currently under construction. You see a rendering of it there on the left side. But this project, if you head back there, is actually being taken care of right now. So properties are not only downtown, but obviously within the districts. We're planning for continued improvement of the residences within the city of Beloit. So we think, or we forecast, that the commission will continue to see an uptick in the amount of COAs that we're dealing with as people are reinvesting into their properties, and especially as we see new homeowners come into the community. Hillary and city staff do a great job in sending, we send letters to every new property owner. So we monitor property transactions. Each owner gets a letter. City staff are on the streets checking for projects that are underway without the COA or without building permits, but obviously working on communication with property owners to make sure all the due diligence is done ahead of time to avoid any headaches once they start. And with that, that's a recap of 2 projects and a little of the work of the commission, and I'll field any questions or comments that you may have.
Rebecca?
Yes, I noticed that you had listed 5 demolitions. Was that demolitions of like an entire property or just part, or?
I will only speak to what I can recall. I just moved from traffic review to landmarks last year, so I wasn't on for the full year last year. But I don't recall any full home demolitions, but I do know in the fall we had a outbuilding on a property within the Bluff Street district that was removed. It was actually at one time used as a barn many years ago. So I know of outbuildings and things that have been attached to homes and buildings, but I'm not aware of any residential structure that was demolished.
I just wondered.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other further questions or comments?
Celestino, is your presentation going to be sent to us or posted on our city's website so that we can be sure?
Allow maybe Julie to answer that. The presentation to be available to council members. They received the 1-page summary, but not the PowerPoint.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
I know, otherwise nobody can hear me. We can email it out to the counselors, and we can get it
Put it
on the
on the
website
website.
as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Blakely?
Yes, thank you, Celestino. That was very thorough. I really appreciate the work of the Landmark Commission since I've joined it as the council representative. I really believe in maintaining the history of Beloit and making sure that the history of Beloit is kept in mind when homeowners want to make changes to their properties. So it's really great. And it's also fun. It is fun.
It is.
Yeah.
It is absolutely fun, and
is.
that's a key component. Is just the continued education of not only those that live within the districts, but obviously those that live throughout the entire city to understand that the preservation of these districts just goes further to ensure that the culture and heritage of our community survives for generations to come.
Yes, sir. Well put. Thank you.
I have to admit that it's one of the more interesting packets to read. So those of you who look at that agenda list and look at the packet list, grab a Landmarks Commission packet when you see one, because it's a pretty interesting read.
Yeah.
And it's one of the more, it's some cool history there and some interesting ways of dealing with it. So
Yeah, the property we just dealt with this past week, which has went by many names, but it's property directly to the north of the town of Beloit Fire Station on Afton. And to learn the history of that packet, we provide the resources and documents that have that entire narrative of property's history, whether it's a small paragraph or it's a long essay. It's just really neat to read those stories and recap memories. With that, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Item 11B is update on homelessness in the city of Beloit.
I believe Deputy Community Development Director Terry Downing is here. And we also need to change that title. It's so much to say.
Yes, it's a long title. Good evening, everybody. I haven't been here in a while, so it's good to see everybody. So there are some counselors who have brought some questions and issues up about homelessness, and especially about youth homelessness. So we're hoping, Julie and I put this together, hoping to explain kind of what the situation is in Beloit, and then what the city is doing about it, and then what in the future we're trying to do to address the homelessness issue in the community. We do have some members of the Beloit Area Task Force on Homelessness here tonight. So we have John Fleiter, who is the Executive Director of Family Services. We have Kelsey Hood, who is the Director of DEFY Domestic Violence that operates a shelter and other programs for survivors of domestic violence. We have Beth, and I never know how to pronounce your last name, Glebe, and she's the Board President of Family Promise, and also, are you the President of BATFO? The leadership team. BATFO is short for the Beloit Area Task Force on Homelessness. And then we have Ann Citrick, who's behind me, and she's part of the BATFO and Family Promise team as well. Did I miss anyone? Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So I think in order to talk about homelessness, we have to start with this cycle of housing stability. There are so many different aspects and phases of homelessness. It's important that we frame this discussion of what we're talking about. So when somebody becomes homeless, typically, the next thing they need is shelter. Programs that offer shelter are typically provide shelter for 30 days or less. Some of the programs are going longer than that now, but it does depend on the funding source and what the rules are. I think with COVID, there's been a little more flexibility in those areas, so some shelters have been able to go longer than that. But typically when we talk about shelter, it's up to 30 days. Then we have a group of transitional housing. That's typically 31 to 2 years. So that offers longer term shelter, and then usually there's wraparound services and programs that assist those households in finding stable housing. So they last a little bit longer. They can address other issues besides just the shelter piece. Then hopefully we can move them into affordable housing. Affordable typically means 30% of monthly gross income in order for housing to be affordable. We know that in Beloit right now that has quickly become an issue. Affordability, one of the anecdotes I read yesterday when finishing up this is one family, their rent went from $850 a month to $1,800 a month, and so that threw them into homelessness. So affordability is a big issue right now in Beloit, and when we talk about the home ARP funding a little later in the presentation, Julie will talk a little bit more about what the options are for affordable housing. And then stability. So it's one thing to have affordable housing, but even if it's affordable, if you don't have stability in the conditions of the housing, in the rent, and the utilities, landlords sometimes can be an issue, and then this huge category of other that can quickly throw somebody or a family into homelessness. When I say other, I'm talking about things like transportation, employment, living wage, health, mental health, childcare. Lack of all of those things can disrupt somebody's stability in their housing. And then prevention, which is a very important piece. It's much easier to prevent homelessness than it is to get somebody out of homelessness, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm seeing nods, so. And so, and that's emergency and safety net programs. So eviction prevention, rental assistance, utility assistance, things like that, that can help people from becoming homeless in the first place. And that's kind of the goal, is we're trying to prevent it before it happens, because it's a much more difficult task and much more costly once somebody is already homeless, to try to get them back into this cycle so they can be stable. Next slide, please. So HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, requires the city to work with the continuum of care for the region. Our continuum of care is the Homeless Intervention Task Force. And this is a requirement of our grant funding. So HUD also requires those continuums of care to conduct an annual count of people experiencing homelessness who are sheltered and unsheltered. That happens in July and January each year. The continuum of care for this area, as I mentioned, is the HITF, which encompasses Rock and Walworth County. We're not presenting those numbers tonight because those numbers are for Rock and Walworth counties, so we're trying to focus on just Beloit at this time, and we're trying to focus mainly on the youth that are homeless. So next slide. So homeless youth and children is under the McKinney-Vento Act. The school districts have to track and provide resources to youth that are homeless or students that are homeless. So under this act, local educational agencies must ensure that homeless children and youth have equal access to the same free, appropriate public education, including a public preschool education as provided to other children and youth. Under this act, homeless children and youth are defined as individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including those who are sharing a house with other persons, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, and campgrounds, living in emergency transitional shelter, or are abandoned in hospitals, sleeping in a public or private place not designated for ordinary use as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings, and migratory children who qualify as homeless because the children are living in circumstances described above. So that's important as we go through these next slides with the numbers, to understand that that whole list, if any child is in a circumstance that's listed there, they are counted as homeless under the Act. Next slide, please. So in the school district of Beloit, this shows the last 4 school years. So from 2018 to 2022. And you'll see that the different colors there, the majority of them, thankfully, are not homeless. The accompanied youth in the yellow, and then the unaccompanied youth. So accompanied youth means that they're living with a family member or a guardian, so wherever they are living, whether they're homeless or not, they're considered accompanied if they're with a guardian or parent. Unaccompanied can be they're living with another family member or a friend or something like that, and then they're unaccompanied. So I'm thankful to see that those numbers are much lower than the accompanied, but the accompanied and unaccompanied are the numbers that show the homeless, what's counted under the McKinney-Vento Act as homeless for youth. Next slide, please. So looking at that top, that yellow and the red, we're breaking down the numbers here again. So from 2018 to 2022, these are just the numbers again of the yellow is accompanied and the red is the unaccompanied youth. Next slide, please. One thing I meant to mention on the last slide is some unaccompanied youth are 18 or 19 years old. If they're a student, they're also counted. Okay, next slide, please. So the child's or youth's living arrangement meets the McKinney-Vento Act's definition of unaccompanied youth definition, which I touched on already, has to meet two standards. The child's or the youth's living arrangement meets the McKinney-Vento Act's definition of homeless, which we looked at in slide 4. The child or youth is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. Physical custody refers to where a child or youth is physically living. As such, a child or youth who is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian is a child or youth who is not living with a parent or guardian. Oh, I love the legal speak. The term unaccompanied youth refers to youth who are both not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian and experiencing homelessness. So they have to have both of those to be counted by the school district. This is the status of our youth in Beloit, in the school district of Beloit. So this doesn't include Turner or I always forget the name of the new school. Lincoln Academy. So this is the school district of Beloit. So the blue represents the unaccompanied youth, and the accompanied youth, and then the yellow is the unaccompanied youth. So you'll see that most of these children are doubled up with, and if they're blue, they're doubled up with family. If it's not, they're doubled up with friends or distant family or something. The second bar shows hotel or motel. 37 children are living with their parents or a guardian in a hotel or a motel, and then 4 are unaccompanied. So they could be living with an aunt or an uncle or a friend or something like that in a hotel or a motel. We have then shelter, so we have 12 that are accompanied in a shelter, and 17 that are unaccompanied in a shelter. So just because they're unaccompanied doesn't mean they're by themselves. They could be with a friend or a distant relative. And then we have the number of unsheltered. So we have 4 children that are accompanied with their parents, and then we have 4 that are unaccompanied. One thing to note is the 4 unaccompanied are all 18 years old. So we don't have small children unaccompanied, thankfully, but they are unsheltered, so living in cars and things like that. And this is what our homeless providers work with these families to make sure that they're housed, and if they can find them unsheltered, they do work, obviously, to try to get them sheltered. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. Next slide, please. Is what the city is doing to try to support the homeless providers that we have in addressing this issue. So a lot of times, families, even though these aren't geared directly towards homeless youth, we are helping agencies that help families, which include those children. With the exception of Project 1649, we do fund that program that is for unaccompanied youth. Some of those children that were labeled as in a shelter are actually part of the 1649 boarding house. So we're going to go through a number of slides that shows what we've done from 2020, which was the beginning of our consolidated plan for CDBG. So this is CDBG funding only. Julie's going to talk about the home funding. Our consolidated plan started in 2020. We updated our NARSA in 2020, which allows us to provide more funding to public service agencies if they help folks in the NARSA area compared to the cap that we usually have to follow. So it opens up. Yeah. So it opens up our ability to fund more agencies and more programs. So I did divide them into the prevention, shelter, and transitional. So if you remember back in that cycle of homelessness, what I consider the homeless activities would be those, that prevention, and then the shelter, and then the transitional housing. Once you get into affordable housing and stability, I think that's kind of outside of the realm of homelessness homelessness, although we do fund programs that I do think those two things also prevent homelessness, but we're just going to concentrate on prevention, shelter, and transitional for this discussion. So you can see in 2020, most of our funding went to prevention, a little bit to shelter, and just a little bit to transitional. We did get 3 rounds of COVID funding, and that was distributed between 2020 and 2021. So that's in the next table, and I will show you a graph so it's a little easier for those of us who are visual like me to understand. But you can see there's a significant amount, almost more than double, that went towards prevention for COVID funding. And then about the same and a little bit less for transitional. Next slide, please. I think that one slide back, there we go. So 2021, about the same, a little over $100,000 goes each year to prevention activities for both 2021 and then what we're allocating for 2022. And we're still at $20,000 and $10,000 to $15,000 for the shelter and the transitional. Next slide. And then this is just a total of the whole year, or all of the years together. So you can see how much, $722,000 just since 2020, the city has used to support the programs listed there for prevention. And that's where the bulk of our funding goes, is for prevention, not only because that's the best way to deal with homelessness is to prevent it in the first place, but also because that's kind of what our providers focus on. We don't have very many shelters in the area, and we don't have very many transitional housing, which we've talked to BATFO about before. Next slide, please. So this is how it looks graphed out. So it's a little easier I'm a visual person, so it's a little easier for me to see this. So you can see where we had this uptick in funding. The blue bars are the prevention funding. So you can see this uptick in funding when we got all of our COVID money, and that went to a number of agencies that we already fund with our regular CDBG, but then we expanded it a little bit to some other programs, including NeighborWorks America. They offered mortgage assistance, so not just for rental and for shelters and eviction prevention and things like that. And then another one that we funded new was Legal Action of Wisconsin. We provided funding to them so they could assist with legal issues with landlords evicting people because they lost employment due to COVID, or weren't able to make their rent due to COVID. So those were kind of the two new ones that we funded under the COVID as far as homelessness issues. And then 2021 and 2022, it's pretty much the same, not pretty much the same, but you can see that there's a trend there that we focus mostly on prevention and less on shelter and transitional. Next slide, please. We'll talk about home ARP when Julie comes up, and we're hoping that maybe we can look at other ways that we can address affordable housing and maybe some of that transitional housing piece that's missing in Beloit. And she'll talk about the process for needs assessment for that. Before she starts, I'll take any questions.
I had a question. I noticed in the 2021 season there was a dip in the count of the homeless unaccompanied numbers on the earlier, about 2 pages back. And then I noticed that it also seems to accompany the COVID uptick in funds available. Was there a relationship, or was that an undercount due to COVID?
That's a really good question.
Because what I'm looking for is does more money mean more results? And if it does, this is evidence of that, and somebody should call it out.
Thank you for that. Oh, it's up to the chair. Somebody, I think Brittany asked.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Oh.
I was just going to comment that.
Yeah. Could you come to the mic, please?
So everybody who's watching can hear your answer.
When in 2021, when schools weren't in session all the time, the counts were lower.
So it was an undercount.
It was an undercount because of COVID.
Okay. it wasn't, yeah, then that's what I thought it was at first, and then I saw the numbers on the COVID funding, and I thought, wow, that's a lot of funding. I thought, well, maybe it did have an impact, so that's good to know, and that's why I asked the question.
I think it did have an impact because I think, but for the funding, that number would be really high.
Yeah.
Because we had extra circumstances that would have thrown people into homelessness that normally wouldn't be there. So.
Yeah, the loss of income and stuff, and, yeah.
And the eviction moratorium
Eviction
as well.
moratorium,
Thank
sure.
you, Julie.
Good call, yeah.
But yeah, so unfortunately, there's no way to tell if the students, that's confidential information, are the same as who were helped with the CDBG funding. I wish there was a way to
There
kind
was
of
more
cross-check.
unrelated factors than simply having the COVID funding available outside of the,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's what I was wondering about, because we were focusing on the school age and stuff, so. I wanted to ask the question, so, thank you.
Sorry.
Councilor Levy did have a question first, and then we'll go to you, Vice President Keys.
Thank you. Just a couple, when we talk about the transitional housing, first of all, let me ask, when you look at the homeless population, are you seeing more male, female, or families? Do you have a breakdown of that someplace? Where is it more males, more females?
The
more
CDBG
families?
numbers are what I can speak to. The agencies may have a better sense anecdotally of what they're seeing. So the CDBG numbers are more female head of households with children.
Okay, and so is it safe to say that there's not really a whole lot of things out there for a male if he's homeless or without? Because it just seems like there's more homes for women and families that way, but if you have males, I don't know a lot of places that house males. I mean, I hear a lot that is for females and families, which is great, but if we have males out there, my thing is, what are we doing with that population?
With no children, you mean?
Male, adult or children, because males with children, males without children, but it's more geared towards the females and the families, from what I've seen.
So the shelters that we have that I know about with CDBG funding, I can't speak to Sparrow's Nest because we don't fund them. But I know Defy Domestic Violence, if there's a male with children, they will house them, or motel voucher. I know that Family Promise, if there's a male with children, but a single male without children for Family Promise, I think you only take families, correct?
Right.
And I don't know, then we do have yeah, we have Britton House with NeighborWorks, but that's affordable housing. It's not a shelter. But the Gifts Men's Shelter, is that still happening?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gifts Men's Shelter is in Janesville, so they would have to go there to get shelter if they're single male. I think Sparrow's Nest does not accept children. I think you have to be an adult single. I'm not sure, because we don't fund them, so I'm not sure what their rules are. So.
Okay, and so when we look at the transitional homes and try to move them into the affordable housing, now would that, for the public's knowledge, would that be the public housing, the Section 8 housing, because there's still a waiting period for that?
Yeah. So I would consider Section 8 in public housing affordable housing,
right?
Not transitional housing.
Right. No, I'm saying, so when we have them in the transitional housing, and I'm looking at the diagram, it says we try to get them from transitional into some type of affordable housing. So, but then there's a waiting period for that, so they could possibly go back to being homeless again while they're waiting to get into public housing.
Public housing in Section 8.
Yeah.
Right.
There is Water Tower Place and other Village on Olympian. There's other affordable housing complexes.
Okay.
I think we need more of them.
Right.
But it's not just public housing in Section 8. And then there's other entities. WIDA has their own set of vouchers as well. So there's a variety of different affordable housing complexes in Beloit.
Okay.
But I think at this point, based on what we're seeing, is there's a lack of that affordable housing. So that is definitely, I think, something, we have to figure out how we meet that need.
Right, and I guess that's where I was going, that in the midst of leaving the transitional housing, whereas after 2 years or whatever, now it's time for me to go, if I don't have an affordable house, I'm going back to the beginning pretty much and starting all over again. So if I'm doing that, you know,
There's
I'm always
also-
saying to, as I tell Julie all the time, I like the process, but I'm always saying, what can we do permanently? Because I'd like to fix this. Don't get me wrong. We need that. But I wish that there was something that we can do permanently instead of starting the ball all over again when we move forward. And then the other question I have is when we're counting like homeless children, I'm looking at the list of items here that can class. Could they be counted twice, any kind of way? So if they fit more.
You mean on the homeless data or?
Right, where it says homeless youth on page 2, the bottom one, homeless youth and children. So that's what I mean, is the school district is collecting that. Could a child be counted twice? If I'm living with my relatives, but then part of the time, okay.
It's by student, so the
Okay.
students are listed.
Okay.
And so the student it's like basically like a student file, and it says whether they're homeless or not
Okay.
homeless.
Okay.
So they're not double counting students.
Okay,
I don't think it's likely that they're being double counted because it is by student.
okay. And then the final question that I have for now is, so if we give them vouchers for the hotels and say we're gonna give you a place to stay in the hotels, are we finding out that the hotels are now being reluctant to accept vouchers? So is it making it that much more difficult to get them into hotels? So that could be another reason why we're seeing an uptick in the homeless numbers, because the
see
hotels
some-
are not, yeah,
some
so, I
very
mean, she can come down while I finish,
assertive
so,
nodding over
so
here,
we're
yes.
seeing hotels are saying, we don't wanna do this anymore. So that could also cause
Yes. In
people to
addition,
be, I think she
yeah.
has.
In,
something.
in addition, we're also seeing with the rents being so high that landlords aren't wanting to take the vouchers that are out there either, because there's a payment standard.
Right.
They have to be below.
And we've had that discussion at the CDA level of, and that's a whole nother discussion that I won't even go into that here.
I didn't
but-
include it in this.
Well, and
Right.
we are increasing the payment standard. HUD actually just told us that, I think, 2 weeks ago, suggesting that we increase that payment standard. So we are going to be doing that because of the issue we have with not using the vouchers. So we'll be talking to CDA about that in the coming months, about how we handle that and to get more vouchers on the street.
Yeah, 'cause-
And I mean, we, as staff, toured the new Family Promise facility, and I know she had indicated that, that they'd been working with motels to provide places for their homeless right now, because the churches weren't open. That's how Family Promise works. And so they've been using motels, and there's just been a limit on what rooms they are able to get and the number of families they've been able to serve during this time. I'm excited about their new facility. I think it'll be fabulous, but it's not yet up and running yet. So I think I think we're starting to identify the issues going on, and we have to come up with solutions moving forward. And I think all these, like what you're saying, is exactly correct. I mean, it's what we're finding. I think it's what the providers already know. And then we figure out, we've got some new dollars coming and how we best deploy those dollars.
Right. And I think I like the fact from the transitional housing to the affordable housing, there's a huge gap there that I think we really need to look at that and say, where do we go once I'm put out in 2 years or more, I'm back on the street or whatever. So I think that's an area that if I'd like to see us focus on, that area right there. But I know for CDA, when people come forward for funding, one of the questions that I ask is, I look at their budget and see how much is actually going towards the problem and not toward administration costs. So that's something that, I don't even want to go down that road, but.
It's just, can I
but-
speak? It's just that, Kevin, so from a provider perspective, it's that wraparound service and helping them figure out their problems and how they move forward. You can't do that without staff.
I get that,
So,
I get that.
So I get what you're saying, but I think the one thing I'm going to point out about CDBG is that when we do the local funding priorities, think of this discussion.
Right.
Because we kind of just go, I think, and I had this conversation with Brittany a couple weeks ago, maybe it was just a week ago, that I know it's hard not to fund all the agencies, but if council views this as an important priority, then prioritizing those CDBG funds to those things where you can have the most impact by putting more funds is something to consider when you get to July, when we look at that. So I
totally
guess remember this conversation.
Right, I totally agree with that, and I think we're moving in the right direction. We've done a lot, but for the general public, they may feel we have this problem. The city's not doing anything about it, but we are, but it's a big problem. I mean, I've been on CDA for however many years, and this was when I first got on there. This was the first thing I started talking to them about, and been talking to it about every year. And I've seen things improve and stuff, and we're in getting tight, but it's just a matter of there's so many hurdles that you got to get over, and you can't do this because of that. But my biggest thing with the landlord piece is, I've said it before, if we're providing the money, at some point I'm thinking we're providing the money, we need to call the shots. I mean, and I know we've had this discussion, but we're kind of saying we need to call the shots. Here's the money we have, and you need to kind of work with us on this. But this is a problem. I'm glad to see we're having this discussion this evening. I don't think it's actually this discussion will never end as long as we have it, because my idea would be, to have everybody off the streets and every child someplace to go, and I think we're working to that. But I think we also have to be realistic and honest with ourselves to say, you may ask a kid, are you homeless? I don't want you to do anything for me. I'm comfortable. I like the way I'm living. And people may find that that's not the case. That's unbelievable. But you may have people out there that says, I don't want to go anyplace. I like living where I'm living. So that's kind of out there too. So, okay, I'm done.
Vice President Keys, and then I know Councilor Duncan also had some comments after.
So thank you for the presentation, Terry, and for all the task force members that are here. My first question is concerning the youth homelessness, the graph regarding the school district of Beloit. It just, with the 2021 to 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, but the previous years are throughout the entire year, so I would anticipate that this graph reflecting this school year will be higher. It looks like it's less, but I would it sounds from the providers that as the school year continues, more students will be identified. Is that correct? Okay. Because and again, thank you to the providers for being here, because it does seem from conversation that you are kind of in crisis mode, and correct me if I'm wrong, and that it's just kind of in survival mode all the time. And so my big question first is, how has COVID made this worse? Because clearly homelessness has been an issue, but it does seem that the impacts of COVID have made it worse, and just wondering if a provider could comment on that, if you have any numbers offhand.
Hi, good evening. So I am Kelsey Hood Christensen. I'm with Defy Domestic Abuse Beloit, a family services program. And so we have crisis mode is the best way to put it. Unfortunately, survival mode. We have seen a significant increase in our hotline calls. And I'm going to point out our hotline calls because when you look at our number of nights that we provide and the number of people that we've sheltered, there's not a significant increase, there's not a significant change, but our hotline calls have doubled. And what that means is that we are getting so many more calls of people that we can't help. We can't fill the need that's out there. Our hotline calls have doubled when we compare from pre-COVID, and those are people who are seeking housing. We've also seen a significant increase in our number of bed nights that we're providing, and that's because people have nowhere to go. We've never really been a 30-night shelter because domestic abuse takes a lot longer to stabilize yourself, find your safety planning, and to find stability. But we've seen our shelter nights jump. People are staying with us for 8 months, 9 months because there's just no housing. The finances are definitely a piece where there's rental assistance in the community, but it's more than that. We have landlords who are requesting, you make 3 times the income, you have 3 months rent the first day, and the requirements to get into the housing above and beyond just the finances have become a significant challenge. So for somebody to rebuild their life after they experience abuse within their community, they want to stay here, they want to continue being Beloit residents, it has been a significant challenge. So.
Thank you. Regarding families and homeless youth, I just wanted to ask, it appears that a lot are doubling or tripling up, and has a similar safety concern been identified within the youth as far as the trauma experienced or youth safety when they are doubling up or cohabitating in an unstable environment?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I don't know if, John, if you are comfortable answering that, if it's okay with the.
I can give a tangential answer to that.
Sure, you come to the mic.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, I did the same thing,
Speed
John.
things
I
up.
did the same thing, John.
Hi, John Fleiterer from Family Services. I can give a tangential response to that. I think it's a critical mistake if we underestimate the amount of trauma that's associated with being homeless. And we run the risk of underestimating how persistent that trauma is, and then we don't realize how that trauma makes it all the more difficult for those families to get back on their feet. So this is a problem that compounds itself, and it has taken what has already been a difficult situation for, frankly, a lot of single-parent families run by the moms who have been marginalized for a long time anyway. So this is making it a much, much more difficult situation. We've been faced with this in terms of where do you decide to put your limited resources? It's the lifeboat game. Who do you save? Who do you have to say we walk away with? And I'm sorry, we're not serving males because we don't see them as the level of risk that you see with a mom with young children. You know, it's a simple calculation. Where is the greatest risk? Where is the greatest harm? And what can we do to serve those populations? The other point that I would make on this is, you know, we talk about trying to get people in housing and keep them safe. That's great, but that's step one. We need to be thinking about what does it mean to be able to function successfully in a family or successfully in a community if you're starting out with limited resources and a lot of baggage from your own childhood. And that's why we're focusing on moms with young children, because we have the moms telling us that they were raised in the same situation and they don't want to repeat that. So the difficulty is there aren't enough resources, and the temptation is to come up with simple solutions that say, well, let's just get more houses, more hotel vouchers, whatever. That's not the answer. We need to look beyond that to consider how do we empower these families that have been marginalized and think about the long-term consequences if we fail to do that. Because if we're concerned about the future, we need to look at what's happening to these families right here, right now. Thank you for being a captive audience. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And just looking at that and appreciating the ACE scores in Rock County, I mean, I feel like there is a tie to some of the violence that we've been seeing with the struggles. So I feel like this is very relevant. And again, I appreciate this conversation. Then my next question, and for right now, is regarding the funding that we allocated from the COVID funds. Are there pots that are still full within the service providers, and you know, as far as I don't know if it's rental assistance or what would be an immediate need as far as funding?
So some of the funds have been completely expended, but some of them have not yet. So I didn't bring that information of what's left and what isn't. We do have some COVID funding that we do need to reprogram that we had designated for something else, and now that will open up. So I'll be looking at that within the next month once our new grants administrator comes on board. But yes, there's still some money out there for the COVID funds, but I think all of the agencies here have expended all of their funds. So did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
I think Councilor Duncan had a couple comments as well.
Yes, I did, President Anderson. First, I want to say thanks to Julie and Terry for working on this presentation. And I also want to say thank you to those providers who are present tonight, who are working tirelessly to help our homeless population. And that said, I do have a couple questions. As we further discuss the ARPA dollars, I think it'll be important to have more data for Beloit. So my question is, the one thing is, so is there a time frame that we'll get that? And then how can we help so that resources are made available and more accessible for those homeless families? So those are my two questions.
And so this is actually a great segue into the home ARP presentation, because there's another half of this presentation, and Julie's going to talk about all of those things, Regina.
So we received, the Rock County Home Consortium, which is our regular consortium that you see, we talk about every year, with Janesville, Beloit, and Rock County, was awarded $2.4 million, so $2,442,156 for the entire county. No specified formula for awarding those funds. Like we have, I think our current home funds, it's about 31% that we receive. But we first need to do a needs assessment of the needs in the county and then figure out kind of which section, how much would come to Beloit, Janesville, and Rock County based on that needs assessment. When I did take a look at the school district data, now the school district was, Robin gave us some more current data, but when you looked at the DPI website and compared like Beloit and Janesville, we have a much higher percentage. I mean, you can't look at raw numbers, you gotta look at percent of enrollment. So we have a bigger homeless issue in the student population at least than Janesville does. And both Janesville and Rock County recognize that that's probably likely gonna happen. So we might get a pretty decent chunk of the 2.4 million, but we won't know that till we finish the needs assessment. And applications for funding will be available this summer. And then our expenditure deadline is actually to 2030. So we can be thoughtful about this. We can take time. Our plan, if you can go to the next slide, but I mean, I'll get into like the eligible uses and then the kind of the timeline at the end. So this home ARP funding is completely different than our normal home funds. So the eligible uses start with rental housing, which is to, you can acquire, you can rehab, construct affordable rental housing for qualifying populations. You can do tenant-based rental assistance to qualifying households, which is similar to like the vouchers. And that's actually an eligible activity under our normal home dollars. We just have never considered funding that. And then supportive services for qualifying populations, and then acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter for qualifying populations. And those are, basically the eligible uses. Next slide, please. And then the qualifying populations, these are the populations you must serve. And so it's homeless, or those at risk of homelessness, and I did not include the long definition of how that's defined. The fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual violence, stalking, or human trafficking. Other populations for whom supportive services or assistance would prevent the family's homelessness, or serve those with the greatest risk of housing stability. And that's why that needs assessment is so important. And then veterans and families that include a veteran member that meet one of the above criteria. And so if you do rental affordable housing under home ARP, 100% of the people served have to meet one of these categories. So it's, the dollars are truly geared, towards homelessness. But then kind of we haven't funded projects like that, so it's kind of a brand new ballgame for us in terms of how we deploy these dollars. Next slide. So our planning process at this point, we had said, we sent something out to the council, city manager sent something out to the council, kind of giving you the general schedule on the planning process, which we said would start in January, and January got away from us all. So we're starting in February. We're gonna do February, March, gonna do a provider survey, some additional consultation with homeless individuals and developers, a complete needs assessment. Our plan is to have a public hearing before this body, either I think March 21st or April, whatever the first meeting in April is, because we want to kind of keep this discussion going. Terry is attending the BATV meeting, which I think is this week, and is going to talk about this as well. And I think her and Jennifer from Janesville are going to be presenting at HITF, and I think both of those meetings are this week. In April and May, we're going to identify countywide priorities, develop an application process, and then June and July will be the funding application period. August would be the preliminary allocation plan being developed, which is kind of like when we do the CDBG stuff. And then the public review, the required public review and approval process would be September and November. These dollars are already awarded, so it's not like a normal year, because this always, you can go to the last slide. Like what normally, Brittany raised this question with me, because a lot of times when we do our CDBG and home process, then we don't get the money till like September, because I think the government is still on a continuing resolution for the federal government. But this money has already been awarded, so it's a little different. So this money will be available once we get through the process. And I think we're open to extending that process if we find we're getting more and more data and you want us to reach out to more and more people. I think we just want, this is one-time money, and I think we want to be thoughtful about it. And I think there's been a lot of concerns expressed today, especially from the two of you who have thought about this a lot, that, you know, and from the providers, and I think, you know, it's like what they have all said, it's a big problem. And I think we want to be careful about these dollars and make sure we're meeting the greatest needs. But that we will be, you know, we're kicking off that project, that process now. And I know it doesn't deal with the emergent needs. Terry did indicate there's some CDBG dollars we may be able to reprogram, so that will provide some assistance. But we see this as beginning of a conversation with the community. I know we've been kind of funding homeless and stuff like that, homeless agencies, but I think we're, this is like, we're kind of moving forward, going down a path. And, but I just want to make sure that we're thoughtful about it and think it through, because there's a lot of needs in our community.
Yeah, and what we'll do, just so we make sure everybody gets a chance to talk, we'll go one question each. I'll go down. I know Councilor Forbeck would like to start.
Yes, I have a question, and I'm going to preface this with saying I hope I don't sound like not me. I don't know how else to say it. But I'm wondering, with all the supportive services that you do, is there, as part of this, help in getting a good paying job? And let me just tell you why this really is a concern for me. I started the Visit Beloit. I was the first staff person. And I was in the office with the Beloit Economic Development Corporation. And I'm telling you, there was a decade when nothing was happening. There were no jobs. There was no growth. And right now, if we can get some people at a good paying job, boy, now's the time to do it, because when things things are cyclical, but when the community or the state of Wisconsin or whatever gets that way again, then it just is almost impossible to get people sort of permanently, you know, someplace where they can really provide nicely for themselves. So I guess that's my question, John. Does your social worker deal, I mean, there's so much for everybody to do, but.
John will take the mic in just a second. So one thing that I didn't include because I wanted to focus just on the homelessness piece, so that one box that I had for stability, CDBG does fund a number of programs that do exactly that. So Fresh Start, skills enhancement. We also fund WIBIC, which is so people can start their own businesses and things like that. But also we have the navigators, and then some of the other providers. They don't just provide homeless services. They provide wraparound services for those things. So I'll let John explain what they do.
That's a great question. And what we've learned, or should have known from the very beginning, is that the employment issue is very complicated. It's not simply a case of getting a job. And for a significant percentage of the families that we work with, mainly single moms with kids, that problem is twofold. You have to have a car that runs,
Childcare.
and you have to have childcare that you can trust. And that's really kind of it's a difficult challenge to figure out which one of those do you want to do, because we see parents that are really wrought over the realization that they can't place their child in a safe childcare situation, but they have to work. Or we see parents who their car breaks down. We've been fortunate to have some support from some private donors that allow us to pay for car repairs. And frankly, that's the best thing, one of the best things we've ever been able to do. Because if your car doesn't run with the transportation and the hours, you don't have a job anymore. So what we have to think, it seems to me, is that we have to have a holistic perspective on this, that we can't just say, if we tweak this over here, we do job training, we're done.
No,
Job
right.
training is essential, but it's not sufficient. And that concept of essential and not sufficient, we need to keep that in mind, because we need to have a response that works across the spectrum, across the continuum. All of our programs need to provide that sufficiency so that we're not having gaps. And that's where the coordination comes in.
Well, I wasn't in any way criticizing. This just is so overwhelming when you take a look and say, I mean, it doesn't seem to be that any amount of money in the world can solve this. I mean, it is almost implacable, it seems to me.
I think one of the challenges is that what we may be attempting to do is being undercut by other factors. It's very difficult to get someone into a position of self-sufficiency if their rent keeps going up or if their wages stay static. So we have to look carefully at the fact that it's unrealistic to assume that the responsibility for improving the well-being of families is solely the responsibility of the families. We need to look and think about what it means to live or try to live in a community where rent has become so prohibitively expensive, or where rental properties have been sold to some developer, and now someone who had been paying their rent religiously is now out on the street because they can't find a place.
Right.
So I think, that's a long-winded way, and I apologize, I'm a preacher's kid, and I've been working on that for years. I think what we have to do is take a step back and, it's kind of a whiteboard thing, right? We just think about what all the factors are that work for us, and then see how we can make those work for the families and individuals that we're concerned with. Thank you for your patience.
And before we get to Councilor Levy, I know City Attorney has City Manager Luther on, and then
Lori, the mic is live.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that the Greater Beloit Economic Development Corporation, GBEDC, is also actively working on several of these interrelated issues. And I think it's important that we really are dovetailing all of the resources and organizations that can provide assistance, because this isn't an issue that can be addressed by one entity or one organization. And so addressing affordable housing and many of those concerns also dovetails into providing opportunities for employment, employability, some initial skill sets, and we are working in a holistic fashion with partners like the GBEDC to provide those solutions, to look at the initial slide that Terry Downing presented, which I think is a beautiful illustration of this cycle of issues, and really needing to understand that cycle and provide different resources appropriately at each phase. Thank you.
thank you, City Manager. Councilor Levy.
Thank you. just a couple things. I think, I don't want anyone to get confused when they hear we have money there that we haven't used yet. And we have more money that we probably can get in the future. Because logically, the thinking is, well, if you have money that you haven't used, use it. Okay, but I think we've just heard that money is not going to solve the issue. And I'm speaking outside the agencies because I'm not in there. So if I say I want, give the money to the agencies, have them create 4 or 5 positions to really actively work on this, that may be fine right now, but when the money runs out, those positions go away, and we're right back to where we are. So I've always been the one that says if we're going to do something like that, we need to make sure that we do something that we can sustain, that whatever money, when we put a position out there, we tell an agency, we're going to give you money for X, Y, Z position, when the money that we're getting from the government runs out, then we better be ready to absorb that into our budget, because otherwise the position is going to go away, and then we're going to be exactly right back where we are now, or in worse shape than where we are now. But I guess what I'm hearing also is that I want the public to know that this is not just a city problem. This is a community problem. We heard it here tonight that the city has the funds that we're funding agencies. The other agencies are here, they're talking, here's what we're doing. But if the rent keeps going up, as the gentleman just said, we're fighting a losing battle. If we can't get people in the homes, and I hear what Councilor Forbeck said, but I just believe you can pay somebody $25 an hour, but if their rent is $1,500 a month, they're still not gonna be able to make it and feed the kids and do this. So a good wage is one thing, but if we can't get them into where they can afford where they live and then eat, and then send the kids to school, and then buy that reliable car. Now I got a reliable car, but I got to put gas in the car. All of that is what I'm saying. It's got to be a community issue. We all got to be on the same page and say, you know what, we're in this fight together. And that's what I'm saying when we talk to the landlords, we got to let them know we're taking on this huge battle. Now, I almost said a word there. We want you to join in on with us, but you're not making it easier. And I'm not saying all landlords, and I'm not really bashing any landlords. So I don't want anybody, the public, the papers, whoever's listening, to say he bashed landlords. That's not what I'm saying. But if we always turn around and we hear people say we need to do something about the homeless population, I think what we need to do first of all is ask ourselves the question: what are we doing? And as a landlord, if we're saying we can't get them into our apartments because we got to charge outrageous amount for rent, I mean, it's hard for me to come up with $800 for rent and then $800 for a security deposit. By the way, we need money for this. I'm already homeless, but I haven't even got paid yet. So this is what I'm saying. This is an entire city problem. I commend everybody that's working on this. And I commend Julie for putting up with me for the last 10 years, and Terry, I keep asking these questions over and over again. What can we do? We're doing a lot. But as Councilor Forbeck said, it will never be enough unless the entire community gets behind us and we really attack this problem like we do everything else. And we're attacking it. But the reason Beloit is where it is now is because when Beloit Corp left and General Motors closed, the residents here said, we're not going to see Beloit suffer. We rallied together and we built Beloit up. We need to do the same thing with this situation here. I'm done.
If I could just respond. You bring up a really good point about the sustainability. So I have 2 points to make about the sustainability. You saw on the charts that I presented that we don't have a lot of providers for the transitional housing piece. Number one, it's very expensive. Number two, you need long-term funding. CDBG is an annual cycle. An agency who's going to invest in personnel and a facility and to do that needs to have funding for longer and not every year wonder if they're going to have funding. So I think that's an obstacle in itself, is our funding cycle, and that, unfortunately we can't change because that's a HUD rule. And then the other is sustainability, as far as what you were talking about with rent. So somebody paying their rent on time, right now, and the landlords just raise their rent. That's not sustainable, even if we're providing rental assistance. One thing that I think Julie touched on in the home ARP, and what home funds can do as far as affordable housing, is it can require those rents to stay low. So that's one of the things that we are looking at, options for the home ARP funds, and we'll be talking about in the needs assessment, is whether affordable housing what we're hearing is a huge need, because you can go through all those steps in that cycle, and then if you can't get affordable housing, then you're just kind of spinning your wheels. And then I did have a last point, but it's left my brain now. So it was a good one too, but I won't remember it.
It'll come back. It's okay.
Okay.
Then Vice President Keys, yes.
Oh, I remembered.
Oh.
And the other thing is, you had talked about the landlord. So I am meeting with the Beloit Property Managers Association. I don't know if I can make their next meeting, but within their next 2 meetings, and talk about these issues, and the rents and the home ARP needs, because we also want to know from their perspective what is stopping them from working with agencies or helping people who are homeless. Why are they raising the rents? I think we need to hear from their perspective. Are they doing it just because they can? Maybe there's real reasons why they're doing that. And I think we need to understand that piece, and then see if there's some kind of partnership or cooperation that the city can facilitate between the agencies and the Landlords Association.
Thank you. Vice President Keys?
So I appreciate the information, on the home ARPA funding, and that it is here, and once we work with the county in Janesville and go through the process, it could be this fall that the funding could be available. And I also very much appreciate what Councilor Levy said, as far as looking at, we need the longer term solutions. And at the same time, we had a couple providers state that we are in crisis mode, and I guess I do want to challenge my fellow counselors up here that we have ARPA funding that is meant to go towards our community to help bounce back from the stress of COVID. And so we're allocated $15 million in addressing issues of homelessness, and this is absolutely a qualifying need. The city of Madison allocated 1/3 of their ARPA funding, not home ARPA funding, their straight ARPA funding, to assist with homelessness support, violence prevention, and affordable housing. And so, I do agree that we throw all the money at it, we're not going to save everything, but if we allocate some funding, if we work with our providers and open up the opportunity in the conversation to use this ARPA funding for these issues, this could
So you're talking about beyond the 2.4 million?
I'm talking about the part of the 7 million we were allocated in July, and then we're going to get another allocation next July. Other communities have used those funding sources.
Right, but some of the other communities are wealthier than we are too, Brittany. I think, we have to really look at everything, it seems to me. We haven't even begun that discussion yet.
I know, and I asked for this presentation over 3 months ago because our providers have been in crisis mode that long. And so
Brittany, can you turn on your microphone?
You got to turn your microphone.
Can you turn your microphone on? We're having a hard time here.
Sorry, this conversation really should not be delayed anymore. I have asked for this item to be on the agenda for this discussion and this purpose because there is a direct correlation between the trauma, homelessness, and violence. And if we have some ability to invest in this, even if it is short-time alleviation, I feel like we have the due diligence to do that. And so my question is, to the providers here, being that you're in crisis mode, if we have ARPA funding available right now, how can we best support the providers we have relationships with to try to alleviate some of the immediate needs? And I know there's no quick, I just, other communities are looking at that. I just feel that waiting until September, we're gonna see a lot more trauma happen.
And trust me, I hear you. And we've had conversation. So I hear you. I share the frustration. But I go back to my point that even if the providers here this evening, if we say we got $15 million and we're going to give you each $5 million, without a plan, we're going to continue doing what we're doing. We're, in my opinion, we're still putting a Band-Aid on a huge problem. So at some point, we need to be able to pull the Band-Aid off, let the sore heal, because we got things in place that they won't get wounded like that again. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, but we can always throw the money out there, but unless we have a viable solution of everything that we discussed tonight, the employment, the housing, the affordable housing, the transportation, all this, we're just throwing money out there and they're going to continue to be in crisis mode. They're going to kind of eliminate, and maybe I'm crazy and maybe I'm wrong. I'm looking at the providers, maybe I'm wrong. You can continue to throw the money at it. We're going to be able to do the job a little bit better, but I don't know how many more people or things we can help without attacking the entire problem. And maybe I'm not explaining it right. And I'm looking to one of the providers, if you come in and say, hey, Kevin, you're just crazy, off the wall, whatever. Yeah,
I just feel it's a yes and. I agree with you, and I'm curious if there is an emergent need as well.
I think that we have phenomenal service providers in the city. They are very dedicated. We have a phenomenal task force. As one of those service providers who have used the CARES funding to provide motel vouchers and rental assistance and bring new programming, it has been a Band-Aid, unfortunately, and it hasn't been enough to really change the trajectory. And so it's not sustainable, and that's part of the piece. So while I appreciate, and I can't speak for all the providers, but my thought process is that I appreciate the willingness or the ability to have further conversation about what's going to be the most effective step going forward, because that does feel kind of like the cycle we're in. There has been an additional amount of resources. We've been able to access CARES funding from both the city and other resources, but it just feels like it hasn't been able to kind of lift us up any further. And it's not because we're not trying. I know every provider in this room is trying their hardest, but I really feel it's a lot of the contextual factors, a lot of the environmental factors that continue to keep us in this cycle. So, and maybe somebody else feels different.
And I think why she's coming down, and I think what I'm hearing is, so we can do the $15 million. It says, we're going to give you $15 million. That's just a number I'm throwing out there. I'm not saying we're going to do it this evening. You leave here and you go back to the hotels and the motels and you say, we got $15 million now. We're ready to put people in here. They're still going to say, we don't want them. So the money is going to now be sitting in your account because you can't really get it to where it needs to go. And so I keep saying, my biggest piece is sustainability. I want to pull that Band-Aid off and make people whole. I think we're frustrated the same way, but I think we're frustrated about the same thing. How we get there, we may vary on it, but we're all frustrated about the same thing. I know you want the now. I want it forever. If I'm homeless and I find me a place, the last thing we can do to people, and this is just how passionate I am with it, the last thing we can do with people is put them in a home someplace and have them a false sense of security that I am here for 10 years, and then the next month when the landlord raises the rent, I'm back out on the street. We did nothing. We did an injustice to those people. We did an injustice to them.
Beth Glebe from Family Promise of Greater Beloit. And first of all, I would like to commend Terry and Julie and Drew for all of their help and for partnering with BATFO, the Beloit Area Task Force on Homelessness, to talk about this. Because Brittany, to your question, when you say, like, what is our funding need right now, I couldn't tell you. We have to make a plan. There has to be a longer term plan. To your earlier question about employment, anecdotally, I would say the 80–90% of the families that are in Family Promise in the program come in employed or are, very soon thereafter employed. And the raise in minimum wage has helped tremendously. It's affordable housing. We're recycling families from shelter to shelter because there's nowhere to put them. There's nowhere to rent. There's nowhere to go where it's less than, $1,200 a month for a family. And even at $15 an hour, you can't afford that. Thank you for your time.
So really, we're talking about we need physical houses.
There you go.
Is what is being said, I think.
Physical housing.
That's part of it. Good evening. I'm not a provider, but I'm Ann Citrick Joyce, and I have been the facilitator for the strategic plan for the Beloit Area Task Force on Homelessness for a period of approximately almost 2 years this month. I would like to tell you that in that time, approximately anywhere between 75 and 90 people have been meeting with us on a monthly basis, virtually, to create a very solid, very thoughtful, very impactful strategic plan. We would be happy to provide you with a copy of that because these providers have identified critical areas that need to be addressed. They have identified the need to partner with the city. They have identified the need to involve landlords and especially the people who are homeless in how to work together to resolve this issue. So, Kevin, your point is well taken. Brittany, your point is well taken. And so is yours, Nancy, and all of those are part of the strategic plan. So we would be happy to provide you with that as a beginning place for a piece of education that is significant about what the providers themselves have experienced, what the needs are of the individuals, and how we can work together to pool all the resources that are available from volunteers, from providers, from people who have been homeless and who are experiencing homeless now or who are at risk because of what's going on with our economy over the COVID period. So we would be happy to provide that with you.
That would be very useful. Thank you, Ann.
I know, Councilor Blakely, did you still have something you wanted to chime in on? Okay. Councilor Preschel?
Yeah, I remember earlier somebody mentioned that we don't have the transitional housing piece is sorely lacking in our specific area. And this looks like the home ARP availability could address that because that's a physical need that can be addressed a one-off. It's just how do you staff it going forward down the road? And that's an important consideration. That takes a lot of time to plan and get going, and that's maybe what Ann's strategic plan would have some of that information. And I keep hearing rental and landlords and rent and prices and cooperation, and I have to go back almost 6 years, 4 or 5 years ago, when the state basically eviscerated our rental program, our rental landlords monitoring, whatever you called it, compliance program. And I wonder if the lack of that program now affects some of these issues we're facing when it comes to these issues here today with the homelessness and the cyclical nature of it. So I'm thinking that does, because I don't hear about it anymore, and I heard about it a lot when I first joined the council.
Thank you. So first off, I just want to really thank all of you that are here. I just got a couple comments, and then we can let you get on with the few hours left in your evening. So first off, I just want to say I work in social work, so I really appreciate all the stuff you're doing. I know that you work 40, but you really do 60, 70 hours a week, and it doesn't stop even without a pandemic, so I get that. I just want to say is I do appreciate staff taking a measured approach. I know we want to tackle this issue, and I know Councilor Levy brought this up too, is we got to get it right. And while we have the money, we need to make sure we're doing the right thing with the dollars, because we're not going to get this stream of funding ever again. So we got to make sure whatever we're doing is going to actually make an impact instead of just throwing money at a problem. So I just really want to thank staff for that. Julie, or Terry, if either one of you still have a voice left, could you just kind of explain to some of my colleagues on the council too about the point in time count, who gets counted, the process of that, or if a provider would just quickly chime in on that? Thank you, Terry. You still have a little energy left. I appreciate it.
So I'll try my best to explain the point in time counts. So the point in time count is conducted nationwide on the same night twice a year. So nationwide, a night in July, providers go out and physically count. Well, there's two pieces to it. There's a street count and there's a point in time count. So the street count is where providers and volunteers go out and between the hours of 11 p.m. and usually about 4 a.m. is when they get done, and go out and actually walk the streets and try to find and count folks who are experiencing homelessness. And then we have care packages that we can give out, and then also usually motel vouchers and things if we do find people out on the streets. And that's happened in Rock and Walworth County. We find people in cars, or I know it sounds cliche or a stereotype, but literally under bridges. That's one thing that is pretty eye-opening. When you do these counts, you walk under a bridge and it's like 20 degrees warmer under there. So it makes sense for people to find shelter under a bridge. But anyway, and then the other piece is the point in time count, which is where each shelter reports on that day how many people are in that they're using in beds. Am I missing a piece at all? How many beds are filled, and they count, male, female, children, households, and things. So it's a lot of data that's collected nationwide, and it's done twice a year. And we were going to try to bring that data forward today, but once we looked at it and it's over 2 counties, we didn't feel that we had the expertise to be able to convey that information to you in a productive way. It's just a bunch of numbers. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, because the reason I want to mention is because I know that the district numbers don't often coincide with that count, because I know couch surfing doesn't quite count for the point in time. Yep.
Right.
Okay, I still remember. My memory's still good. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
it's like that. Those numbers don't quite line up with what HUD is using for definition of homelessness. So I just wanted to make that point too, that the two definitions don't quite line up, and I know.
Yeah, they don't really match at all. So
Yeah.
the HUD definition and the McKinney-Vento definition that the school district uses, they're not the same. So the HUD version doesn't count doubled up as homeless, or living in transitional housing as homeless. Well, they count it in the point in time count. Yeah. Yeah. So the HUD definition of homelessness is much more tight compared to the McKinney-Vento. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my main question. I just wanted to also, last thing, and you don't need to answer it, just more of me getting on soapbox here, is that, I know that, unfortunately, I think, our state government's made it a lot tougher for us, especially when it comes to housing. Act 176, I believe, is the act you're referencing, Mark, that.
No, there's 2.
That's the main one.
One year apart, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the one that we had one of the lawsuits over, was the rental permits. So I know that's made it really difficult for us to have any oversight on that end. And then obviously inclusionary zoning, we're really stuck there, and then also rent control. So we have no say over what we can do as far as the cost of rent. So as much as it's our community issue too, we have a state government that's unfortunately made it very difficult and tied 2 hands behind our backs to solve this issue.
Yep.
And I will get off my soapbox and have no more questions or comments.
Okay.
That next item, please.
We are up to item 12, reports from boards and city officers. 12A is the city council may adjourn into closed session pursuant to sections 19.85 sub 1 sub E and sub G Wisconsin statutes to deliberate or negotiate the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, namely a discussion related to a possible cooperative boundary agreement between the town of Turtle and the city of Beloit, and to confer with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved in. Town of Turtle versus City of Beloit, Rock County, case 20-CV-240. The council will not reconvene into open session.
Do I have a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Preschel, second by Forbach. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We're now in closed session.